Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to episode 2 of the Bright Lights Breakdown. I am your host, Wyatt Bagnall. And today we are going over any and all things head coaching, vacancies, and hires, essentially. So we're going to start off by ranking the head coaching hires from this last cycle and then previewing potential vacancies, and essentially hot seat candidates going into this season. So, starting off with the hirings, I'm going to do this one in just conventional order, 1 through 5, because I think that, at least to me, the ranking of these is pretty cut and dry, but I sort of want to explain my thoughts on them. So, number 1 is Sean Payton. This is a pretty obvious one. He's a phenomenal head coach. He's an amazing hire for the Denver Broncos. This is the type of hire that changes the entire trajectory of your franchise, really. Um, there's very few coaches that can stand across from Andy Reid, Mike Tomlin, Bill Belichick and say, I'm not outclassed and I'm in the same league as those guys. And Sean Payton's one of them. So now this all really comes down to Russell Wilson, man. I mean, I think last year was just the worst case scenario and that it really only can get better from that. How much better? I don't really know. But Sean Payton will give Russell Wilson every opportunity to do that. And ultimately, I mean, a lot of people like making fun of the Broncos for like how it went last year, but in terms of a process standpoint, they're making all the right moves. They went and got a quarterback last year. They had to do it. It didn't work, maybe, who knows? But same thing. They needed an amazing coach. They need somebody that could stabilize the situation and really figure out what the problem is, and they've done it. So that's the best hire of the offseason. Number two and number three is where I struggled to rank them because I really do feel that they're equal. But for the purposes of needing to rank them, essentially, I'm going to go with Frank Reich at number 2 for experience. And there's just a lot less unknowns with Frank Reich. Carolina needs somebody to steady the ship, and Frank Reich can certainly do that. His firing in Indianapolis had a lot less to do with coaching prowess than it did with just the situation just got bad. They needed to fix it. And every once in a while, these things just run their course, and it's better for everyone to just split. And I think that that's what happened in Indianapolis. The quarterback situation, obviously, was not great there, and it's not great in Carolina. So hopefully they have a plan for that coming into this. Because I don't think Frank Reich wants to be in another situation where he's just having to patch it together 1 year at a time with quarterbacks. I suspect this means Carolina is going to try to draft one and give him the time to really try to develop them. And if that's true, I like this hire. I think he's a really good coach, and Carolina did a good job. Now, third is D'Amico Ryans. Of all the first-time hires, he's my favorite of them, and for a few reasons, really. One of them, from his time as a player all the way through his time of being the assistant coach of the year as the defensive coordinator for the 49ers, D'Amico Ryans has checked every box in terms of football knowledge, his leadership, and his experience. A lot of coaches, you have questions about, like, head coach is more of like a leadership role. Are you able to do this? Are you able to manage this? Are you able to manage that? You don't have as many of those questions with D'Amico Ryans because even as a player, he was the leader of those defenses. Like the 49ers players all rave about him being able to communicate with them and teach them individually and just how he relates. So you don't have like the same questions of does the personality translate from coordinator to head coach. His personality is very authentic and translates really, really well because he knows what he's talking about, and these guys all know it and sense it the moment he opens his mouth. He also comes from a really, really good coaching staff. Probably the best like overall coaching staff in the league is with the 49ers. I mean, the Texans, I didn't think the Texans were going to be able to pull this big of a whale, but good on them, man. This feels like the one that they've been waiting for in a lot of ways. The last two really felt like bridges and patches. Like nobody really, I don't think the Texans really intended to keep those guys when they hired them. This feels like somebody that they're intending to keep. Now the question becomes, can they outduel the Colts to trade up probably for Bryce Young? Or do one of those two teams cover somebody else, like Will Levis or C.J. Stroud or whatever? Because Bryce Young is small, but um, overall, I mean, in terms of a coaching hire, though, it doesn't get much better than D'Amico Ryans in terms of first-time hire. So, hats off to the Texans. Up next at number 4, I've got Shane Steichen for the Colts. I don't really have anything against the hire. I don't think it's the type of slam dunk that the other three are, but here's where it sort of falls for me. I think that the Colts are in a very weird place, and I think they're in a very impatient state of mind where they're tired of losing. They want to get back to being like one of the top franchises as they were for the better part of like 15 years. And I think that led to some rash decisions last year, and it could lead to some rash decisions this offseason and this year that I just don't know how well positioned Shane Steichen is going to be to succeed. I mean, for example, I think there's a really good chance that general manager Chris Ballard is on the hot seat this year. And that could lead to a really messy dynamic in the building because if those two are disagreeing, I mean, Chris Ballard's got something to sort of like try to strong arm him for, you know? Because Chris Ballard's not going to want to lose his job for a decision that Shane Steichen makes. So I think that this is going to be a really interesting year. The other thing that makes this a little interesting is that the talent that the Eagles have is not the talent in Indy. And before this year, there weren't a lot of people really looking at the Eagles coaching staff and being like, those are some like really smart guys that we need to poach and take on. So I just think that there's a little more with both these last two. They're obviously the two Eagles assistants. Both these last two, they're more sort of they just sort of appeared out of nowhere this year. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but just in terms of you know getting something a little more certain, that makes it a little more risky. And then last up at number 5 is Jonathan Gannon to the Arizona Cardinals. I just think this is a weird fit. First of all, the situation in Arizona, it's a full rebuild, and Kyler Murray is probably going to miss half the year coming off a major injury. So, I don't think we can judge Jonathan Gannon off whatever happens this year. This is going to be a rough year in Arizona in all likelihood. But where I find this weird is Kyler Murray is at a crossroads in his career. The image around him publicly is not great right now. He's viewed as a diva. He's difficult to work with. He's good, but he can't always stay healthy. And I think that that's a very odd position to hire a defensive head coach and expect him to be able to really relate to Kyler and shepherd him through this time. I would have rather seen somebody like Eric Bieniemy go to Arizona, somebody with an offensive mind who understands Kyler's strengths and can sort of eliminate all the concerns about him just by putting him in an awesome position to succeed. And I just don't know if the Cardinals did that with Jonathan Gannon. He might be a great coach. Their defense might be improved and all that type of stuff. I just don't know if this was the right time or the right place for him. He could have fit in somewhere else possibly, but I don't know. I keep looking at that as the spot where I would have really liked to have seen an Eric Bieniemy type end up in Arizona and give Kyler Murray the best possible chance to succeed. Now that we reviewed the hires from this cycle, I want to preview some of the ones that I think could be available next year or are the ones to start looking at in terms of the seat heating up because I don't think there was a ton of jobs this cycle that were particularly appealing, but I think that there can be a lot in the next group that are really appealing. Like I have 3 teams on here that are potential like you just switch the coach and you could go over the top type teams. I'm going to do this in reverse order from like the least likely to the most likely. Now, number 7, allow me to be very clear with this. I don't think this one will be fired next year or probably ever, but I think that if there's another down year for this franchise, we could sort of start seeing the stage being set for a voluntary exit or retirement, and that's Bill Belichick with the Patriots. He's the best coach of all time, but he's not going to coach forever, and the last few years have not quite lived up to what I think Bill or the Patriots or Robert Kraft wanted. And I think that if there's another rough year with Mac Jones, if the receiving weapons and all that doesn't get better and the offense sort of stagnates, I do think that'll get better with Bill O'Brien. But with the Bills in the division, the Dolphins trending up, it's just sort of the Patriots are in a weird spot. And I don't think Bill Belichick necessarily wants to go out with that type of a whimper. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Patriots struggle again and miss the playoffs again. That we sort of start setting the stage for the end of that chapter in New England. He won't be fired. He's done too much for the Patriots. But I just think that things are getting a little tense in New England right now. And it might be time for that relationship to end. You know? Sometimes a relationship just runs its course. It's not really anyone's fault. But, you just fall out of love with each other after a while. And I wouldn't be shocked if that's sort of what's happening here. All right, next up, I'm doing 7 of these, by the way. So Bill was 7. Number 6 is Ron Rivera with the Washington Commanders. Now, the thing that might save Rivera's job is the pending sale of the Commanders, and that they simply might want some level of stability throughout that process, and just not shake up everything, blow it all up, unless new ownership is really interested in doing it, and that depends on when the Commanders sell, but that's just a potential mitigating factor here for Ron Rivera. But on pure coaching alone, the Commanders are struggling to keep up even in a weaker conference. And Ron Rivera's done a lot of things really, really well. But consistently having a winning team has not been one of those things in Washington. It wasn't even really one of those things in Carolina. It was sort of 1 year on, 1 year off, 1 year on, 1 year off. And in Washington, it's been 1 year on and every other year off. I just don't know. This feels like something where the Commanders are just treading water, not even in a particularly good place. I think he's too good of a coach to have them at the absolute bottom of the league and having a really high pick. And they might be in this weird limbo state where it's better for everybody to just part ways, bottom out, and rebuild. I mean, I think that if he is fired, he probably gets another head coaching job because he's a good coach who can, at the very least, turn you around and make you respectable enough. I mean, Washington, even when they don't win, I mean, he's had to deal with some amazing levels of dysfunction in the Commanders building. And the fact that that team is not absolutely falling apart at the seams, that's a testament to him. But I just think things don't seem to be going great in Washington. And with them hiring Eric Bieniemy as their offensive coordinator, I wouldn't be shocked at all if the decision after the season is to move on from Rivera and give the job to Bieniemy. I think that sort of sets the stage right there. Number 5, I've got Robert Saleh with the Jets. The Jets are not a patient franchise, and New York is not a patient city. Personally, I would not put Robert Saleh on the hot seat. But the seemingly cemented bust status of Zach Wilson could undo this regime, despite the fact that there's been an influx of young talent at basically every other position, and a young and elite defense forming in the Big Apple. But if they can't get the quarterback right, man, it's like there's only so much to be done. They're in a position this offseason, I think, where if Aaron Rodgers decides that he wants to stay in Green Bay, then they have to sign Derek Carr. They need to sign somebody that has a fairly consistent baseline. And they don't have that guy in the building right now. I think Derek Carr, in all likelihood, goes to the Jets because I'm not even sure if Aaron Rodgers wants to leave Green Bay that he wants to go to New York. That's a very difficult place to play, and I think at this point in his career, Aaron Rodgers just sort of wants to play football, try to win a Super Bowl, yes, but he also doesn't want to spend the twilight of his career being harassed by the New York media. So I think Derek Carr is probably their guy this year. And I hope that gets them to the playoffs. Otherwise, I think Robert Saleh could be in some trouble. Now, these last 4 are jobs that I think could legitimately be open under the right conditions. if I was to rank them, I would say that the Commanders' job will probably be open. I don't know about the Jets' job, but we'll see how that goes. But these last four, I think there's a real shot because I think that they would all have to do some pretty significant things to keep the jobs. So, first up, Todd Bowles with the Buccaneers. No matter how you choose to assign the blame for the 2022-2023 season, it was a massive disappointment in Tampa Bay. Some would say it was age finally showing with Tom Brady. Personally, I think a lot of it goes on the coaching staff because if you look at a lot of the grading and the numbers and everything like that for Tom Brady, he really didn't play that bad. But they didn't have a run game. Their defense was struggling. They made inexplicable decisions in crucial moments that cost them games. And that falls on Todd Bowles. The Buccaneers front office and ownership also seems to think that it was a lot on the coaching staff because they would have wanted Tom Brady back, and they were also putting some mandates down about getting rid of some coaches, such as Byron Leftwich. And I don't know that this is a fair situation to Todd Bowles because I think that the Buccaneers are an aging team that are in need of a rebuild or a retool. It would be a fairly extensive retooling. But overall, I think the Bucs are a rebuilding team, and it's a rebuild that probably isn't going to happen under the leadership of Todd Bowles, unfortunately. I think he's a really good coach, but maybe he's better suited as a coordinator because now in 2 stops, it sort of hasn't gone great. I really hope that the Buccaneers are better than I think they're going to be this year because I like Todd Bowles as a guy, but I don't know, man. I just think Tampa Bay is a job that's probably going to be open next year because I think they're going to go into a rebuild, and I don't think they're going to want to do it with Todd Bowles. Number 3, I got Mike McCarthy with the Cowboys. I give a lot of credit to Mike McCarthy for this year. Personally, I think he did a pretty good job this year, but he's been under heavy scrutiny ever since he landed the Cowboys job, and this year felt a little different. Where in previous years, I don't know, you didn't really feel like the Cowboys were going to make a run, but this year the NFC was a little bit of a weaker conference, and then they got bounced by the same team that bounced them last year. You know? Like, there just seems to be a very hard ceiling on this Cowboys team under Mike McCarthy's leadership, and it's apparently the divisional round. They made the wild card round last year, missed the playoffs the year before, I think. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, it would have been the year before. And maybe your argument is, hey, they're getting one step closer each year. But I don't get that sense because I always get the sense that when the Cowboys go up against the best teams in the league, they're at a disadvantage schematically and strategically. So it also doesn't help that every time their season is ended, essentially, it ends in these crazy, viral, inexplicable looking plays that just don't go their way. And it all falls on Mike McCarthy at that point, even when, like this year, for example, listen, they weren't going to convert whatever they were going to run anyways. The 49ers defense was not going to go for like a 70-yard touchdown with no time left. So that doesn't really matter. But the problem is the image of it. And they always seem to be a talented team that finds ways to lose due to undisciplined decisions and undisciplined plays in crucial moments. And I think if Jerry Jones really wants to win the Super Bowl, he'll probably have to make a change at the top of that coaching staff. Maybe you give it to Dan Quinn because they keep managing to keep him around somehow. But I don't know. It just feels like you're never going to have the advantage as a coach, like in the coaching matchup, if you have Mike McCarthy as your coach, going against Kyle Shanahan or Matt LaFleur just in the NFC. And then you get to the AFC and you got Andy Reid, Sean Payton, Bill Belichick, all those guys, Mike Tomlin, John Harbaugh. You're not going to have the advantage on any of them. You got a middling coach when you're trying to do something really special, and that doesn't usually work. So number 2, this is a job I also think is going to be available. I'm not certain about the Cowboys job. I think that if they get to the Final Four, McCarthy will probably keep his job because I think Jerry just likes him. But I think that this next one, I think this job's coming open next year, and that is Brandon Staley with the Los Angeles Chargers. He already feels like he's on borrowed time with the Chargers, because they are in a very unique situation. They're one of the few teams in the NFL with an elite quarterback on their roster where almost nothing else around him functions at a high level. They can't run the ball, and they can't play any semblance of defense, despite a very talented roster and a supposedly hard-nosed defensive-oriented head coach. You know? The Chargers, they always find a way to underwhelm. They blew a 27-point lead in the playoffs this year. They screwed up getting into the playoffs 2 years ago because of like some boneheaded decisions against the Raiders. I mean, it just feels like they should be an amazing team all the time. Like they're always the offseason darling, and we always fall for it. I refuse to do it this offseason. No matter what, the Chargers have to show me before I believe in them because there's no reason to believe in them. They've never done anything. And I don't know, man. The Chargers, they really, I wouldn't be shocked at all if they just, if they just got a really good head coach. I wouldn't be shocked at all if they were a Super Bowl contender. You know, they should be. They've got a lot of the talent to do it. I mean, they need to upgrade both trenches. Defensively, it has to be like all in their front. They're a tissue soft defense. It's really pathetic to watch. But I mean, when you're a defensive head coach, your defense isn't good. You're not managing the game well. Your offense sputters and is like underwhelming constantly, despite having an elite quarterback who you refuse to let him throw the ball down the field. I mean, there's just not much going for the Chargers in terms of strategy and scheme and game management or any of it. But they kept him when they could have had somebody like a Sean Payton, but instead watched him go to their division rival. And I think that's going to come back to bite them. Because overall, I mean, this is really what it comes down to, man. The Chargers should be a perennial contender, but they're instead a perennial punchline. And with that being said, I think the Chargers' job will be open next year. And now, number one here. This is the one that I think might shock some people, but I think that Sean McDermott with the Buffalo Bills, I think that seat is getting pretty hot, and I think that everything's being turned up in Orchard Park right now. Because for the last 2 years, many people, myself included, thought that it was likely the Bills' time to finally win it all and break through and end like the drought and end the stigma of they lost 4 straight Super Bowls and all that stuff. And despite being the favorite for the last 2 years, really, they failed to even make it to the AFC Championship in the last 2 years. Josh Allen is a phenomenal talent. He's the type of quarterback that you never feel you're at a disadvantage with. Even going up against Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady when he was playing, stuff like that. You never feel like you're at a disadvantage at that position when you have him. However, you are at a disadvantage because they simply don't do enough around him either. He's the best part of their run game. He's the best part of their pass game. Their defense is a defense that is good but not great, especially this year. And I mean, they just, from a scheme standpoint and a roster standpoint, they're really basic and they're easy to figure out. Because outside of Stephon Diggs, they don't have anything. And, I mean, it's basically just, if you just tackle Josh Allen, it's over. Because he's their biggest runner. If you just rattle him a little in the pass game, he can be a little scattershot. But they've never helped him with an O-line. They've never helped him with a run game. And I think this is another situation where after you pay a quarterback big money, you have to pick where you prioritize, like, your money to go. I think they need to be willing to take a step down on defense and fall somewhere a little closer to the middle of the pack and load up on that offense because Josh Allen is what will take you to a Super Bowl. But overall, I really do think that anything short of a Super Bowl berth this year likely means a regime change in Buffalo because they're not a team that should be missing out. They're not a team that should ever be missing out on the Final Four. Not in their eyes, not in the eyes of a lot of people. And I think that this is a situation where the Bills might have to look at Sean McDermott and say, hey, you've done an amazing job for us. You really have. You turned us around from being a moribund franchise, and you made us a relevant one. You made us a team that's considered a Super Bowl contender and a favorite a lot of the time. But we think we've also gone as far as we can go with you. and it might be somebody else that has to take us that last step. So I think that that's also quite possible because I want to see how the offseason goes because the Bills are close enough that they can switch that narrative in a year. But I think that could be the shock firing of next year is Sean McDermott with the Bills. So overall, the vacancies that I think are potentially available are the Bills, the Chargers, the Cowboys, the Buccaneers, Jets, Commanders, and I don't think the Patriots will be available next year in all likelihood, but I think that we could start seeing the groundwork being set for that job to become available. Um, so yeah, I think that next year's coaching cycle could be really interesting, especially if Cowboys, Chargers, and Bills all come open, because those will be three jobs that are highly coveted. And yeah, that wraps us up for today's show. And thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Share the video. Do all those things that help the channel grow. I appreciate it.